Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Gordon Chang, political commentator and author of Plan Red, China's project to destroy America. Gordon, thank you so much for coming back on.
Well, thank you, Brittany.
I want to discuss where we are right now when it comes to the trade talks between the United States and China because it seems like we're at a really contentious point. Last month, we saw a big development in these negotiations. The two countries agreed to majorly roll back tariffs for 90 days as negotiations continued. But over this weekend, President Trump claimed that China, quote, has totally violated its agreement with us. This is an accusation that China has wholeheartedly rejected. So what do you make and how do you characterize the moment we're in right now?
This is an extremely difficult moment, and President Trump is right. China has violated the May 12th agreement. In that agreement, China said it would roll back non-tariff measures that it had put in place after April 2nd, what Trump calls Liberation Day. But clearly, China is still maintaining its ban on the export of rare earths to the United States. And that, we understand, was actually discussed in Geneva prior to May 12th. So clearly, the Chinese have not complied with their agreement. And I have to say, I'm not surprised.
Talk to us about that. I mean, what are you not surprised about? Because you took issue with something the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury posted. He posted this, quote, China must follow through on its commitments to support global supply chain resilience and economic stability. And then this is what you said, quote, stop telling China what it must do and begin hitting the regime hard. We have cajoled, talked to, and pleaded with the regime for decades. And for decades, the regime has procrastinated, lied, and cheated. I've had enough. It sounds like you're pretty fed up right now.
I guess I am. We have talked to China for decades about what we thought was in China's best interest. And I believe that we're right. But it doesn't really matter because right now we know that Beijing does not agree with us. It calculates its interests very differently than the way we think they should calculate them. So let's get realistic. Let's stop talking to China about what it should do and start imposing severe costs on China for what it is in fact doing. And now this is on us. We've gone through this so many different times. We just got to understand that Xi Jinping is intransigent, that political system is intransigent, and we must act accordingly.
How do you think we should act? Because the administration said that they expect a call sometime soon between Xi and Trump. What do you think needs to be discussed? How do you think President Trump should handle that conversation?
Well, President Trump should be tough, and he should say if China doesn't immediately comply with the agreement, the U.S. will raise tariffs to 145% general tariff rate, 1,000%. I really don't care. It needs to be extremely high. It needs to keep Chinese products out of the U.S. as long as China refuses to comply with its agreements. Now, I believe that we should be at a time where it looks like we could end up in a war because China is preparing for war. It talks about it all the time, and it mentions us as its enemy. We need to get prepared, which means we need to be resilient. And I understand that that means we are going to be less efficient as an economy. But right now, efficiency is not really that important. What's important is resilience and the ability to make sure that we can continue to survive as a nation in a very difficult situation.
I want to talk about that and dive a little deeper into those comments. When China is calling the United States an enemy, when you bring up the word war, I mean, do you realistically think that A, we need to be so tough talking about China that we're using the word enemy? And B, do you foresee a potential future war with the United States and China?
Yes, I do foresee a war, unfortunately. China's regime calls us an enemy. People's Daily, the most authoritative publication in China, in May 2019, carried a landmark editorial that declared a quote unquote people's war against us. Now, we're Americans, so we don't take propaganda seriously. But what China is doing with language of that sort is creating a justification for itself to strike the United States. Now, I don't think that Xi Jinping is going to wake up one morning and say, let's launch missiles against New York. But we see some very dangerous Chinese activity in its peripheral seas against South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and faraway Australia. And I'm concerned that one of those incidents will spiral into a war. And that's partly because Xi Jinping has now configured the Chinese political system so that only the most hostile answers are considered acceptable. And that means China will not be able to deal with the international community after one of those incidents. And so that is the reason why we could very well see war.
And President Trump, and this is all coming as we are in the midst of these, what seem to be heated trade talks. President Trump recently posted this quote, "I like President Xi of China, always have and always will, but he is very tough and extremely hard to make a deal with." What do you make of that post? What do you make of his characterization of Xi? And do you think that's helpful to the current negotiations?
We need to put that into the context that throughout this week, American officials have been saying that there will be a phone call between Xi Jinping and President Trump this week. But we haven't seen a date. And I think that it might not occur this week. And it might not occur for a very long time for a number of reasons. One of them is that the Chinese believe that they have our number. They believe that they can force President Trump to back down. And the other thing is that Xi Jinping is in political trouble at home. And so I don't think he wants to do something which could cause him angst. And, President Trump, after a phone call, could say or do things that Xi Jinping would be blamed for. So right now, it is, I think, really hard to come to any sort of deal with the Chinese on trade or anything else for that matter. So I don't think that this is going to be a period where we are going to be happy with the results. But we just got to understand that's what's going on in China. And that is driving events right now. And there's nothing we can do about it.
And do you think from that perspective, it will be easier if the two leaders get on the phone? It could cut out that noise. They can hash out things directly. Do you think that that's the easier route? Do you think we'll see more results that way?
I don't think that that will lead to results because, we believe as Americans that communication is critical, that we can always convince others to see things our way, or it can lead to compromise. But after decades of having this approach and not getting good results out of China, we need to come to some conclusions that this just doesn't work. It sounds like it should work, Brittany, but in fact, it hasn't. So because of the structural differences between China and the United States right now, and because of the growing problems inside the Chinese political system, I don't see that that conversation is going to help matters.
Do you think the Trump administration understands that they seem to be at an impasse where this isn't working and there are structural differences between China and the United States? Do you think that A, they recognize that, and B, they should change their approach at all when it comes to these trade negotiations?
Yeah, I don't know what's in the minds of people in the Trump administration, but the fact that they keep on talking about a phone call, which keeps being pushed further and further into the distance, indicates to me that they don't view things the way I do. So, no, I don't think that they get it. And because of that, I think they're going to get suboptimal results, as some people might like to put it. But, this is not going in a direction that is good for the United States. We need to pivot. We need to impose those costs. And we got to realize that after decades of misguided China policy and after decades of misguided trade policy, we're not going to get out of this without costs. And President Trump needs to make that point clearer than he has in the past.
You want to see a pivot. As we said, China and the United States agreed to majorly roll back these tariffs temporarily for 90 days. And we have less than 90 days now. So aside from that potential phone call between Xi and Trump, what are you looking out for as we go on through these 90 days before that pause is lifted?
Well, I'm primarily looking at developments inside the Chinese political system because we're seeing events which are unusual and which are not consistent with the notion that the regime is stable. So, for instance, we have information that suggests that, for instance, Xi Jinping has lost considerable influence and maybe even control over the Chinese military. And that, of course, is a critical development. We are also seeing reports of instability inside the civilian side of the Communist Party, although we don't really have much corroboration on that. but we do have corroboration on the problems in the military side. So that's what I'm looking at, because the problems inside China's political system will drive China's external behavior. And that means it'll drive trade negotiations, for instance.
And I want to get your opinion, switching gears, your reaction rather to two Chinese nationals who were arrested recently over smuggling in fungus, allegedly. What's your reaction to that situation?
This looks like they were caught in the middle of carrying out a biological weapons attack on the United States. This was a fungus that could blight American agriculture. And we need to see that this is in the context of a series of events that is at least a half decade long. So in 2020, Americans in all 50 states received seeds from China unsolicited. And this looks like an attempt to have Americans plant invasive species. We also saw this year that Temu, the online Chinese site, was sending seeds into the United States unsolicited. So this looks like a broad-based assault on America's farms. And we need to consider that when we think about our relations with China. You know, we're trying to come to a trade deal with China while they're attacking our farms. To me, that's just wrong for us to talk to China in these circumstances.
To that point, I mean, how do you think this will, or if it will at all, impact those trade talks?
I wish I knew. As I mentioned, I think it should lead the Trump administration to end the trade talks, but that won't happen, of course. But I think that we're going to see increasingly belligerent actions on the part of the Chinese that over time will lead to basically a breakdown in those trade talks. Right now, the problems inside China are too great for Beijing to deal responsibly with anybody, especially the United States.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for. It's a very fluid situation. And Gordon Chang, per usual, I always appreciate you coming on and giving us your insight. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime.
Well, I so much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Brittany. So thank you and stay safe.